Well, we got a fun, little different type of interview today. Instead of one person, I have two candidates for the United States Senate running in super red states, running as independents, not as major party candidates. We have Brian Bengs from South Dakota, Todd Achilles from Idaho. They've agreed to appear together. In some ways, their campaigns are trying to be helpful to each other, share best practices, try to figure out what's the easiest way to raise money without getting sucked into one of the partisan vortexes, which seem to can blow up independent candidacies. In some cases, it's the model is a bit of what we saw in Nebraska with Dan Osborne, but I hesitate to throw the Dan Osborne example out there because I think while Brian and Todd probably share some issues where they agree with them, they may not agree with Dan on all issues, and everybody wants to be seen. When you're running as an independent, you're an independent for a reason, as I like to say. And both Brian and Todd joined me now. Thanks for agreeing to do this. And obviously you guys are familiar with each other. So you're in fact, you guys pitched this. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Look, I'm going to try to ping pong. Like my job as moderator, right? My job is to make sure. So I will do my best to do this. So Brian, let me just start. Simple question. It's going to be the same question for both of you. But why are you running, and why as an independent? You have, and why did you reject a major party?
Well, I think South Dakota is one of multiple states where the national party politics don't serve regular folks. So the regular voters are being left behind. Republicans take us for granted, and Democrats forget we exist. And I've been a registered independent for 97% of my life, which is similar to a quarter of South Dakota's registered voters and nearly half of national voters, if you're paying attention, everybody. Mm-hmm. Regular people like me, and obviously the independents, are angry at the DC establishment and the party system that doesn't work for them. And I think justifiably so. So that's why I'm running, because the system hasn't worked for regular folks for quite a while now.
You ran as a Democrat once. Talk about that. Obviously that experience soured you. Why?
Yeah. As I said, I was a registered independent. I registered as an independent when I was 18 years old. So 97% of my life, except for that experience, I was infuriated watching Americans beating law enforcement officers with poles and chanting for the murder of the vice president on January 6th. When the South Dakota Democratic Party was poised to give now Senate Majority Leader John Thune an unchallenged free pass for re-election, I felt somebody needed to do something, so I stepped up to run. And of course, I am not a multimillionaire by any step of the words, and I am a political novice. That was my first time doing anything. So I thought I could only be a legitimate candidate with one of the two parties. And I had to set aside my independent affiliation for what I thought was the pragmatic alternative to John Thune. What I learned, and which is shaped why I'm doing this now, is that my approach in that race was I would go up to people, introduce myself as a candidate, and I would go up to people wearing Trump hats, introduce myself, and literally say, I'm going to guarantee with 100% certainty that you and I will agree on at least two, but probably three things. And then I'd run down my list, and they're nodding along, and typically it was all three. And we get to the end, and I'd say, so can I count on your vote in November? And what do you think the first words out of their mouth were?
Which party do you belong to?
What are you? What are you? So what are you? And then you say, well, I was a lifelong independent, but I'm running as a Democrat. And far, far too many times I heard I'll never vote for a Democrat. And that was it. We'd agreed on these things, and then they just said no.
What happened to the Tom Daschle voter? What happened to the Tim Johnson voter?
They have gone away, I would say.
Did they move? That's my curiosity. Do those same voters exist and they've just left the party, or do they leave the state?
I will say that the current head of the South Dakota GOP was a 30-year Democrat.
No
so
kidding.
He was a registered Democrat for 30 times longer than I was. And he's now a hardcore MAGA individual. So the voters there, I think it's summed up in I vote for the person, not the party. People still say that. I heard it in 22, but they don't actually mean it because, as I said, I'll never vote for a Democrat. That is where those voters went.
All right, Todd, your turn. Why independent? Why not either a Republican primary or the Democrats?
Yeah, well, I think the core thing for me, Chuck, is I'm profoundly worried about what's happening in Congress and what's happening to the country. And it doesn't matter who's in power. We have the same debt, division, and dysfunction. I actually served as a Democrat in the Idaho legislature for 2 sessions. My district is 25% registered Dems, and I won with 60% of the vote. And I'll tell you, the number one thing I heard when I was knocking on doors is, "Wow, Todd, you're a better Republican than that crazy on the ballot." And when you look at Idaho, there's multiple factions of the Republican Party. There's no good definition of what it means to be Republican. And so now, the question is, what does it mean to be conservative, and how do you meet the needs of the state? But, when you look at Idaho, we have this really strong tradition of being independent. So when we closed the primaries in 2012, 70% of Idahoans were unaffiliated with the party. 70%. That was the highest in the country. Boise State University does an annual public policy survey. 65% of Idahoans said they were independent, or they self-identified as independent, or I'm a Republican, but I leaned independent. And importantly, a couple of years ago, when we passed Medicaid expansion, we did it with 61% of the vote. That was by far the highest of any red state in the country. 80% of counties voted for Medicaid expansion. And so there's this, on these consensus issues, Idahoans can come together. And that's what we're trying to get back to, those core values, by being an independent and not being part of the Dems or the Republicans.
Is it specifically the Dem brand on cultural issues that made it impossible for you to talk to that voter that agreed with Medicaid expansion?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you've had a decade of underinvestment in the Dem party. It's the same thing in South Dakota as Idaho, where the brand is there's been no pushback. There's been no countervailing force. And listen, the Dem party, the longest serving governor in the history of Idaho was Cecil Andrews.
Yeah, he was a long time. He served in the Carter administration, right, as Interior Secretary.
That's exactly
I have
right.
that right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Four terms.
Yeah.
And a Dem, but it was those. They were kind of these core Idaho values where everybody could get behind Cecil. And I think the Republican Party itself, or I'll call the GOP leadership, has really been taken over by John Birchers and some Christian nationalists. So they don't represent Idahoans.
Right.
The Dem party's got all of its own issues in the state. They're not really representing Idahoans. So if you think about it, both parties have kind of got into the corners, and you look at this big distribution of people in the middle who feel underrepresented, and those are the folks we're trying to meet.
What's interesting is both, and I'm going to address this to both of you because both of your states, the delegation out of South Dakota is not really, look, John Thune and Mike Rounds are not MAGA guys. They are sort of MAGA adjacent and have had to figure out, they're trying to stay. I watch it. And I've interviewed Mike Rounds and John Thune a million times. I know them pretty well. I think I do, at least. So I know what Jim Risch and Mike Simpson in Idaho are very much what I'd call Bush Republicans. Okay, whatever what the definition of conventional conservative Republican from the first decade of the century, that's Mike Simpson, right? That's Jim Risch. And yet, so I guess let me ask you, I'll start with you, Brian, why? Because in Kansas, when it was one party, basically the split and basically the Chamber of Commerce Republicans said, you know what, we are going to go support a Democrat for governor to create some balance. Now, we're not going to support Democrats for federal offices, but we're going to do that. Do you sense that the Republican Party is going to split in two? I mean, where are the mainstream sort of Mike Simpson Republicans going to go if the state party keeps moving further and further to the right?
Well, there is a fight going on right now in the state party, state GOP. Mm-hmm. We have, I think last count was 4 candidates for governor right now. Mm-hmm. And you've got, a super hardcore MAGA, and then you've got hardcore MAGA, and then you've got Dusty Johnson is currently our representative in the House, who's running, and he's a former Truman Scholar. He's a smart guy.
He's not a MAGA guy, and he's trying to fit in. He's trying just enough. Like I watched Mike Rounds, I watched Thune, right? I understand strategically what they're trying to do. The question is, will voters buy it, right?
Yeah. So that'll be the challenge for them coming up in the primary for the governor's race of what's going to happen. And then our current Attorney General, Marty Jackley, is going to run for the House. And as far as I know, he's the only one who's announced for that. So he's got a pretty easy glide path. And I don't know that he's a MAGA guy, hardcore MAGA guy. He may be like softcore. But yeah, so how this is going to shake out, I don't know, because they're going to fight, and they're going to fight hard about this. And I agree with you that John Thune and Mike Rounds, they're not hardcore MAGA, and Mike Rounds has gotten criticized for that before. He's been labeled a rhino. Trump, in fact, labeled him a rhino himself before changing his mind later when he fell in line. So what's going to happen? I don't know. I can't predict what the voters, the GOP voters, are going to do. But we've heard from multiple GOP voters that are unhappy with the situation, because this is obviously farm country. So the tariff situation, and John Thune and Mike Brown's going like, oh, no, do what you want with the tariffs, even though that is the legislative branch's power explicitly in the Constitution. It's all you. So is that hands-off position going to help them? I don't know. This is a wild card.
Well, that's what your candidacy is going to test. I mean, there is, to me, the farm belts loosely, right? And it's the states that in particular have got a lot of people that make a living exporting excess ag product, right? We already feed ourselves, so we're exporting it. That's Kansas, that's Nebraska, that's Iowa, that's South Dakota. That's frankly, you could say it's everybody grows soybeans, right? It's almost every state, and we are going to have soybeans literally just rotting, I have a feeling, and not being able to get rid of it. Todd, same in Idaho. In some ways, how have the Mike Simpsons and Jim Risch's and even the governor got pushed from the right? I think it was Governor Little who, was sort of so distraught over the mask wars that he got emotional about it. Like, what are we doing? Like, I'm not making anybody do this, but don't criticize somebody who does. And it was like, how is that controversial, right? And here was a very conservative guy being seen as not MAGA enough.
Yeah, and I think that's just indicative of where the Republican Party is being pulled in Idaho, being pulled from mainstream conservative values. And Governor Little, who I spent a lot of time with Governor Little when I was in the legislature. I have a ton of respect for him, but he's in a really, really hard place. And I would push back on this idea of Risch being a Bush Republican. Frankly, I'm a better Bush Republican than Senator Risch is. He goes wherever he needs to go. He played games with public lands over the last couple months, when Senator Mike Lee was trying to push that through. And public lands are sacred in Idaho, right? I mean, this is hunters, herders, tree huggers.
Throughout the West and Midwest on that stuff. Like, it's one of the reasons you live out there. It's for the land, not to develop it, frankly.
That's exactly it. And he played games with this thing and finally came around at the last minute. And for the ag industry, right? There's only one strategic industry in the state of Idaho, and that's ag, right? It's about 17% of the economy. And these tariffs are really scary for ag. Not only the tariffs, but also all the market concentration going on. It's fertilizer and seed and chemicals and everything else. I mean, that's, farmers and growers are getting squeezed. And it's not getting better. And I think that the fundamental problem with Risch is that he's a career politician. And listen, the far right in Idaho don't like him. The moderate Republicans don't like him. He hasn't done town halls. Shoot, I've done more town halls in 2 weeks than, we think he's done in 10 years, as best as we can count. And he's just lost touch with the challenges of Idahoans. And it's, it's tough to live in our state. Wages are low, costs are high, and everybody's getting squeezed. And Jim Risch just seems to be aloof of all of these challenges.
One of the tougher questions you're going to have to answer for that swing voter who's probably a Republican, but doesn't necessarily like the direction of the Republican Party, but isn't ready to be a Democrat, okay? Isn't ready to support the Democrats. The toughest question you're both going to be answered: if you win, which party do you caucus with? That you still are going to have to make a choice, right? Are you voting for Schumer or are you voting for Thune, right? Who do you organize with? And I'm going to preface this with what a pollster friend of mine described if it was the campaign, the Evan McMullin campaign against Mike Lee, where this pollster is convinced had Evan McMullin said definitively, if he wins, he'll vote. He is going to vote with the Republicans to organize the Senate. That doesn't mean he'll vote with Republicans for all these issues, but he will vote. That had he said it, it would have been the difference between winning or losing. Utah's a pretty conservative state. So is Idaho. So I'll start with you. There's a populism to South Dakota that might be slightly different to me than I think Idaho's electorate, but I'm willing to be persuaded. But where are you on this question?
Brian and I and Dan in Nebraska and Ty in Mississippi, we've spent a lot of time talking about this. We listen. The root problem in Congress right now is the money, is the corruption, and we've decided we're gonna caucus on our own, right? And if you just look through the numbers,
and how does that look? I get it, right? But those of us that cover that, what does that mean? I think there's power in that personally, right? I think if you guys, 100%. One person can't do this, but 4 of you could, right? 4 or 5 of you could sort of say, hey, you got to work for our support, and maybe if you give me a committee chairmanship, I'll think about it, right?
And I think the fundamental strategy is you deny a majority to either party, right? So right now it's 53 Republicans, 45 Dems, and 2 independents. Dems may pick up 2 best case, that's probably even a stretch. Right. But, if 2 out of 4 of us win, now you're 49 Republicans, 47 Dems, and 4 independents, right? So there's no majority. If all 4 of us win, it's 47, 47, and 6. Yeah. Right? Counting Sanders and King.
I might count Murkowski in that. I don't think, she's sort of in some ways arguably just like Bernie and King, which is she's won as an independent, but caucuses with one side, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think from a policy standpoint, I'm incredibly aligned with Josh Hawley, what he's doing around big tech, what he's doing on, minimum wage and other things. I think there's another person where you can find some alignment on this thing. But the fundamental strategy is you deny the majority to either party. The independents become the fulcrum. We're not beholden to these just massive money machines that both parties have built up. And then that's how you drive this reform on campaign finance, on stock trading, on ending these revolving doors, all of this stuff to get all of these misincentives out of the institution.
Brian, I think your challenge is slightly greater because one thing about small states, they're aware that you need congressional leaders to make sure you don't get run over, right? And I'm curious if you think Thune's leadership is actually an impediment to your candidacy.
No, actually, I would view it more as a benefit because when you contrast Senator Thune, who defeated Majority Leader Daschle back in the day to get his seat in the Senate, Daschle delivered for South Dakota. So we have roads that were funded only because Daschle was there and a variety of other infrastructure projects. So if that's how you judge things, then Daschle brought money in. If you look at Thune and Rounds now, they are literally taking money out. So we're losing Medicaid funds, Medicare funds, and this and that and the other thing. Infrastructure funding goes away. So the point if that's the point, then the existence of Thune and the silence of Rounds as not advocating for things that South Dakotans want, because, hey, the party says we don't want to do this. Right. That's not advocating for South Dakotans. So I am all on board with the discussion that Ty, Todd, and Dan and we are having about we need to change the status quo. The status quo is a product of both parties, the dysfunction. So if we have people that say, I reject both parties, and here's what we stand for, good government reforms and a variety of other things that we commonly agree on, and say, you are not going to be able to have a majority and you are not going to be able to have a majority. But if you want our votes, you have to earn it. And we're looking out for the regular folks that work for a living. So that is the power. That's what we're selling here, I think, fundamentally, is the disruption, entire disruption of how the system is dysfunctional right now in the Senate. If you get 3-4 of us in there, things have to change because there's no majority to do whatever you want to do?
Look, I like to think there is an appetite for disruption, or else Barack Obama and Donald Trump wouldn't have been president, right? In some ways, both of their candidacies were prefaced on the, hey, are you tired of the way the system has worked? Let's try something different. And I do think it explains each of their initial successes. So I buy the disruptive aspect, but here's another thing that aligns against you. Frankly, it aligns against what I'm trying to build here. It's that the information ecosystem really punishes the middle and nuance and independence, right? It's very hard for you to get your message out. So, Brian, let me start with you. Right? The way algorithms work, right? You either get pushed to the left or pushed to the right, and it's is that the biggest impediment you face, almost more than it is money or anything else? Is the way the information stream works against the independent candidacies or independent media?
I would say it doesn't work necessarily against independents only. It works against all candidates without the money to just force their way in. Like, right. On my, I'm going to just call it Twitter because that's what it was born with.
I know. I do the same thing.
I get these ads from the super hardcore MAGA candidate for governor, and I've canceled them before, but he's forcing his ads in front of my eyes.
Geolocation, I assume, right? You're a South Dakotan. Yeah.
So it's the way to force yourself in. So if you have the money, you can get yourself in there. The problem is that it takes money to buy getting in the information stream. So is it a problem for you if you don't have enough money? In 22, I was outspent 14-1. And I'm told that we had ads on TV, right at the end when I could afford some, but I never actually saw any myself. So voters they fundamentally just did not have any idea who I was or what I stood for. But when they heard who I was and what I stood for, they liked it. They just didn't know. So that is the big problem, I would say. And that's why the elections are now so expensive, because you have to spend so much to get the attention of people.
What are you trying to do differently this time that you didn't in 2022?
Well, I'm trying to have more money. So that's the big thing. But no, we've got a different game that we've organized. I learned a lot. And your point about the fact that nuance is lost. I'm a former professor and I'm an attorney by training. So I'm very much.
You live in the gray area. You know how to work gray area.
Like the details of where you make your money. So I want to dive into that stuff. But that's my biggest difficulty as a candidate is I have to be able to shorten it down to a slogan. That is a problem for me because I need to talk about the details. And so we're using Substack to explain policy positions that I'm putting out of like, hey, here's this background and here's why I think this. Right. So when I put it up on my website, where I have like a sentence or something, ideally I can have a link to the Substack that says, here's a whole bunch of backstory to this. But fundamentally, we need to be able to afford to put it out and force it in front of people's eyes because they're going to like what they see. I know that already from the 22 race.
Todd, how would you describe that challenge, right? Which is just the way the algorithms are aligned against the middle. I mean, they're just, look, I think this is our problem, right? Where all of the incentive. I have been channeling the Milton Friedman quote. A great Milton Friedman quote that said, you can elect all the good people in the world. If you don't have good incentive structures, they're not going to do the right thing. Bad people will do the right thing if you have really good incentives. So there's some truth to that, right? We have terrible incentive structure, and the incentives work against moderation and work against sort of if you don't fit into left-right paradigm. How are you trying to beat back at this?
I guess I push back that being moderate or being in the middle isn't necessarily boring. I was inspired by John McCain in the
I think it's quite interesting because you end up having interesting debates in the middle when you're a bunch of people you agree with. It's boring,
Yeah.
Anyway.
But just as an example of this, so in the last session of the Idaho legislature, I was thinking about how to highlight just some of these really dumb bills that come across. And I was sort of inspired by, remember John McCain used to have those pork awards? So there was a dumpster outside the Idaho Capitol, and I would do my dumpster bill of the week. And people love that. And you know, it was just 30 seconds on, you know, here are the 3 reasons why this bill is just ridiculous. And I got a ton of traffic, people coming up to me in coffee shops and restaurants.
Look, you got to have a shtick, love it. You know? Yeah.
A little
shtick is okay.
We've just, you know, continued that thing. And you know, and these platforms are difficult, but with the right message, targeted in the right way, they can actually be used. But honestly, Chuck, I think the fundamental thing in a state like Idaho, I mean, we're only 2 million people, is you got to get out and have the conversations and meet with people. And I've been doing a statewide tour. We just wrapped up the 3rd leg of this thing. I've done more than 20 town halls, traveled all over the state. I mean, and just reinforcing what an incredible place Idaho is. But this is it. It's these face-to-face conversations. It's talking with local reporters in the local weekly paper. And this is, you know, we're building a huge volunteer organization. This is how we're going to win in November 26th. It's face-to-face. It's conversations.
Let's talk about the national climate. Brian, what's your diagnosis at how we got here, where political violence is now no longer shocking, that it just happens? I mean, we may have been surprised that Charlie Kirk was killed, but I wasn't shocked that political violence erupted again. We've had it all year long. We've had it for the last, I would argue that we've had a decade of escalating violent episodes. January 6th, we can rattle them off, and they're sadly pretty bipartisan. How do you think we got here?
Well, what you were just talking about, information. So we live in information silos where the algorithm pushes you to, hey, you like that one, so you like this one. Oh, here's another one that you'll like. And you didn't like these other things, so you're not going to hear anything from the other side. So it by design functions that way. And we get the anger and fear motivates people. So that's where we are. And not to dismiss the fact that we've had increasing, not political violence, but increasing violence with guns over the last, several decades. But fundamentally, democracy is supposed to be a pressure relief valve for these conflicts, for these arguments that we're having. And if we think that democracy isn't working, which is one of the things that I believe, that the system is corrupted by money principally to serve some aspect of society and leave the rest of us down here fighting for scraps. When we're fighting for scraps, if you think about a pack of dogs that are hungry, they fight each other for things. And that's what we're seeing. If we can fix democracy, I think we can fix the prospect of political violence and minimize it if you can just vote and say, hey, I disagree with you. Here's my vote. And it actually matters.
Brian, what do you do with the following voter? Because I ran into this in 24, which is the voter that says, yeah, I'm concerned about the democracy, but I got to make ends meet first. What do you say to that voter who says, I will get, I agree with you on democracy, but that feels like that's something I'm going to worry about down the road. In the meantime, I got to figure out healthcare.
I would say that's the same question. You've just highlighted the same thing. Why is our healthcare so expensive? Why do we pay the highest per capita costs in the world? Because the system rewards that. If you look at who the donors are for the Blue Cross Blue Shield, who they giving money to, it's kind of split down the middle between the Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, what does that tell you, right?
Yeah.
Just want to keep the status quo. Right.
The money has corrupted the system. And if you have the politicians that are beholden to, who wrote me the biggest check? And I felt this pressure in 22 of, if I got a large check, if somebody maxed out to me, then the next time they call, I'm taking the call, just because that's how the system works. I'm doing a different approach this time. So my average contribution for the first quarter that I was in was $21. And if you contrast that with Mike Rounds, he had 200 large dollar contributors, and he had 87% of his funds came from 200 PACs and big money individuals. So the way we do politics, and the fact that this is allowed, and the Supreme Court says, oh no, there's no problem with giving money. You should have more money in politics. This is the problem. Why are things bad for you? Why is healthcare so expensive? Because of politics. Why is there inflation that's not being addressed? Because of politics. This is the issue. It's the same thing. We need to fix democracy to make it work.
I don't disagree with your the problem is voters. I mean, I want to get to the campaign finance thing a little bit, but in a minute, because it is one of the great conundrums when you present voters with the data that you just presented, they agree. You're right. This system is messed up, but it has been really hard to make campaign finance a voting issue. Right, the way people will vote on gun rights, they don't seem to vote on this issue with that same fervor. But I'm going to put a pin in that because Todd, I'm curious where you are in the climate issue.
Yeah, I mean,
from the Charlie Kirk situation, and there's a race to blame, right? And I can already feel it, right? Each side, it's butting. Yeah, we have our crazies, but they're worse. And you're like, that's not how we get out of this.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's wrong. This political violence is wrong. Charlie was exercising his First Amendment and not hiding, or pounding away on a keyboard. He was there in these groups having these conversations. He was doing exactly what we need.
We said this is how you're supposed to conduct politics, which is you go out there and make your case. Whether you may not like the case he's making, but that's how you're supposed to do it, not rig the system. And he wasn't, trying to do that.
That's exactly it. And so much of this is where we're spending, where Americans are spending their hours during the day on these platforms with these, algorithms that are driving outrage, because that's where the profit is, right? And I think just connecting these economic issues, these reform issues. I mean, one of the things I've really been highlighting on, and I spent 20 years in the tech sector working for T-Mobile and Hewlett Packard, two of the biggest companies in the U.S. And you just see these outrageously bad corporate practices going on. And, I was driving back from Eastern Idaho a couple of weeks ago, stopped off at a Sinclair station to gas up. One woman about my age, running the convenience store late at night. She was working until midnight. She makes $18 an hour in a part of Idaho where you need 23 just to live, no health care. And Sinclair, if you look at their 2024 financials, $29 billion of revenue, $1 billion of operating income. And what did they do with that operating income? It didn't go back to their employees. It went to their freaking institutional investors in the form of dividends and share buybacks, right? That's the kind of stuff that makes a difference in these lives. Walmart's the same thing. Walmart's the largest private employer in the state. And guess, when you talk to Idahoans who are in the Medicaid expansion program, right? They have jobs, but not enough to qualify for the health exchange. The number one employer of the 80,000 Idahoans in the health exchange, Medicaid expansion, is Walmart, followed by McDonald's, followed by Amazon, right? I mean, it's these, and Walmart did close to $3 billion of share buybacks last year. That's about $2,000 for every one of their U.S. employees. I mean, this kind of stuff is just fundamentally unacceptable, that we allow corporations to push their costs onto taxpayers. And particularly in a small state like Idaho, where Walmart does $3 billion of revenue in this state. This is the kind of stuff that, guys like Jim Risch, they just chipped away at these guardrails we've had on what's acceptable in the private sector over the last decade or two. And now we've just got this where folks are running amok, and you've got, basically 60% of Idahoans aren't earning a livable wage in the state. Chuck, and that's just flat freaking wrong, right? We cannot tolerate that.
And how many of those folks just, and look, this gets at too, where the issues that the economic populist issues are popular, but this is where the culture sort of gets in the way of the conversation, doesn't it?
And this is why, as an independent, I can have a conversation with these folks in a way I never could as a Dem. And all the corruption in the Dem party, what happened with Biden running again and handing it over to Harris. I mean, that was all unacceptable. But I tell you, I was in a rural community up in the mountains in the Idaho Panhandle, hanging out with the vets for coffee, and one of them came up to me afterwards and he said, "You know what? I'm an extreme conservative." I'm like, "All right, cool, man. What's that mean?
What does that mean?
And we had a great conversation, and he is deeply concerned about the national debt. I'm like, man, I'm right there with you. That has to be a bright red line. We can't grow this thing. And then as we talked about it some more, the guy had a heart attack 6 months ago in that little rural hospital in this town that is just barely keeping their doors open right now, saved his life. And with the one big beautiful bill and the Medicaid cuts that are going to come out of that, and I sat down with that hospital CEO. He's like, I don't know how we're going to keep the doors open after this. I mean, this is the kind of stuff where what the hell are, we've got two of the most powerful senators out of the 100 in Idaho. The state is punching way above its weight in terms of influence in the Senate. And what the hell do we get?
What do you get? What are you getting in return? Interesting. Brian, let's go back to the issue of campaign finances, because I everything you say is true. And in fact, I've been hawking a book that a friend of mine wrote with his brother, the Mullins brothers, and it was the basically the Wolves of K Street, it's called. And it's sort of how did we go from essentially, the rise of lobbyists, which really didn't exist in the 60s and 70s. It just sort of began the rise of Ralph Nader got corporate America to say, hey, we got to have a response to this. And lo and behold, we got K Street. And it's a very professionalized thing. And now we have it where it is no longer, it used to be a corporate entity versus a people-powered entity. Now it is literally one corporate entity hiring one set of lobbyists to fight for a certain regulation that helps their business and screws their competitor, and another set of, like, we now have K Street is just arguing about who's splitting up this piece of pie that never trickles down to the rest of us. Like, I used to sort of be like, well, the system's the system, blah, blah, blah. Now you're just like, we've sort of, it's become too efficient where now you need lobbyists to decide who gets to rig the regulatory process. But it's always been a challenge to get the public fired up about money. And, have you, what are different ways you've thought of trying to send this message? I mean, you've been using it with me here today, Brian, but what other thoughts have you tried to get the public to sort of be a bit more self-aware about corporate influence?
That was actually one of the things, when I mentioned, hey, I'm going to guarantee we'll agree on at least two, but probably three things. Mm-hmm. Money in politics corrupts the system. Everybody, literally 100%.
It's an across the board agreement about it. Yes.
Everybody's like,
that's true. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
But they notice, right.
Have people have the elected officials wearing NASCAR jackets with patches of who they actually.
Please. Yeah. Why not? It might help.
So, talking to people about, everybody knows it from top to bottom. But I think what got in the way, again, I'm going to say, was the fact of, I'll never vote for a Democrat. Yeah. We can have this discussion as an independent and not deal with I'll never vote for a Democrat. And so if I walk up to people and say the same thing today and say, well, I'm running as an independent, I still have them. I still have their attention. So if we can tie this all back to, why is healthcare so expensive? Well, hey, look at the system. Let's look at who gives money to who, and are they going to, stop that gravy train? No. So if we can tie it back directly to why is this so expensive? Why is that? What is the problem here? Everybody implicitly knows that already.
My first year professionally covering politics was 1992, and that's the rise of Ross Perot. And I bring him up because Ross Perot, we used to describe it as a crescent moon, in that he overperformed in states that kind of formed a crescent moon. It was sort of Texas that was like the bottom of the crescent, and the right up through Minnesota, right to the Great Lakes was sort of the top of the crescent, and it went all along. And he was over 19% basically in all of those states. He did really poor in the Deep South, did okay in New England, in Mid-Atlantic, not so much, but really, was in the mid-20s in both Idaho and South Dakota. I just double checked that. 27% in Idaho in 92, 26% in South Dakota. Do you think those voters still exist? Todd, I'll start with you. Because that is 35 years ago.
Yeah,
admittedly.
But I think it's, I do think they do, because again, going back to the numbers that I was just talking about, right? 70% unaffiliated with the party in 2012. So that's not that long ago.
By the way, Perot came within 1 point of being in second place in the state above Bill Clinton at the time.
Yeah. And 65% of Idahoans just, this survey this year identifying as independent or leaning independent. So the values are there. And I think a lot like, with Brian and our part of the world here, I mean, you live in these states because you want to define yourself. Nobody's the boss of you. And those values I think those values are timeless. That's why folks come here.
Brian, the independent mantra, what is a way, how do you make the case that you're going to at times represent, the Republican lean of the state and at times the independent lean of the state? How do you divvy that up?
Okay. Well, obviously I one of the things that I've told people is I'm running as independent because I like to think for myself, which has always been true. As a lifelong registered independent, the best question, I think, is how do I differ from both parties? How am I going to represent both parties? Mm-hmm. So if we take immigration, that has been, I would say, probably the hottest issue, electoral issue, at least in 24, and for years before that as well. It's one of the big ones. So the last comprehensive immigration reform was the same year that Maverick and Goose first felt the need for speed. Do you know what year that was?
Guess we're going back to 87, 88?
86. 86.
Yeah.
The year I got my driver's license. Beautiful year.
Yeah.
So 86 was the last big one. And, Top Gun was on the screens. Today, pragmatic reform requires two parts. The first one being strong border security. And the second one being overhaul of the legal immigration system, I believe, to allow more immigrants in, and to streamline the path to citizenship to make it easier and, something that can be accomplished within a reasonable amount of time. Now, I support both of those components, which is not the position of either the Democratic or the Republican Party,
right,
for different reasons. Republicans obviously support sealing the border. That's what they're trying to do now. Mm-hmm. And they oppose, apparently, improving the legal immigration process, while Democrats support improving the legal immigration process, but they balk at stronger border security.
Right.
So if we look back, President Biden's first bill when he took office was immigration reform. And the Democrats controlled both the Senate and the House. Yet you heard crickets for the first 2 years because the Democrats couldn't agree on border security, right, until they finally had to late, running up to the election. Without a united position, why are they going to go talk to the Republicans about like, hey, here's what we're working on. Do you want to sign on board to this? So they let it go. So that would be one of the ways. I'm a pragmatic person. I look at things, I'm trained this way as an attorney, I'm trained this way as an Air Force officer. You look at things and say, hey, that didn't go the way we wanted, or we're having this outcome. How can we tweak things to make it work properly? And if there's a Republican plan that does that, I'm on board. If there's a Democratic plan that I think does it, I'm on board. So it's an issue by issue thing of what is going to work. And I'm going to stay right now, after 40 years, I believe the trickle-down economics, horse and sparrow economics, if you will, doesn't work. So despite our efforts to keep cutting our taxes for the billionaires and the large corporations to make us wealthy and to pay down the debt, that's not working. So things need to change.
Todd, one of the things that it's already been disappointing in the wake of the Charlie Kirk and assassination and the assassination of the Minnesota lawmakers is that the only complaints you hear in Capitol Hill are, what about security for me? Right? Rather than, hey, maybe we ought to do a special committee here of some of our best and brightest minds and figure out how can we de-escalate and actually, build a better discourse. That the two parties don't know how to work with each other anymore in a horrendous way. And I think, which I'm guessing could be an appeal. Yeah.
And I think, Chuck, it's baked into the system. That's part of the incentive, right? You make more money when you say outrageous things on the floor, or outrageous things in committee, and you feed that outrage economy, and that feeds the donor cycle. When I got appointed 2 sessions ago by Governor Little, and I showed up halfway through the session, and I talked to my Republican colleagues, and they're like, "Hey, don't even bother." I'm sorry, my Democratic colleagues, don't even bother talking to that kind of third of the room. you're not going to get anywhere with them. They're far righters. I'm like, all right, well, you've been here 6 years. I've been here 6 days. Fine. But last session, after I won my race, I made a point of just connecting with every single member of the chamber, finding those points of commonality. And Chuck, I was so much more effective in that building by having those relationships. And you never knew where, I mean, listen, I would argue like hell with somebody about marriage equality. And, there was this far right effort to overturn, a letter passed by the legislature calling for us to overturn Obergefell. And I fought that thing tooth and nail. And the person who was the sponsor of that, guess what? She dislikes monopoly power as much as I do. And so she co-sponsored, and some others did, my bill to prohibit algorithmic price fixing. So, and I caught a lot of crap from Democrats in the state for even, for working with this woman. Yeah. But like, guys, guess what? These purity tests are the reason why you're irrelevant in the state, right? Find these points of commonality. You don't have to agree on 100%, but I'm trying to save Idaho renters who are being taken advantage of, and there are other people that want to work with me on that. I'll do that all day long. And we protected absentee voting. We protected citizen initiatives. We killed a bad bill to make it easier to carry guns in schools. I did all of these things on a bipartisan basis, and that's what you bring to the chamber. And I'll echo Brian here. It's these financial incentives that are just sending the chamber in the wrong direction. And we got to break those financial incentives. I think that's the root issue.
All right, let me get you guys out of here on it's a little bit of a cheap stunt, but I think listeners like these things because it does help them paint a picture of you guys. So Brian, I'll start with you. Give me 2 senators you look forward to working with if you get elected. And then give me, just let me start there. And then I got one more for both of you too, but go ahead. Give me a couple senators you're looking forward to working with if you get there.
Bernie Sanders comes to mind immediately. Mm-hmm. And I would have said John Fetterman when he was first elected, but I would not say him now. Let's see. I don't know.
You're stumped a little bit.
Obviously, I'm stuck because I'm going to have to say a Republican to be balanced here. Or I could just cheap out and go, Angus King. Love the independent individual there. So.
I hear you. All right, Todd, same question. You got, and what I'll do, Brian, I'll make him answer the other question I have for you first, so that way you get a second. So, Todd, give me your 2 senators that you're looking for?
Elizabeth Warren and Josh Hawley.
Okay, all right. Yeah, you dropped the Hawley name, so I figured to get there. Look, Hawley and Schatz are working together on quite a few of the kids first issues when it comes to tech algorithms.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. All right, so you get to answer this next question, Todd. Give me your favorite Democratic president and your favorite Republican president.
Favorite Republican president is Eisenhower. Mm-hmm. Favorite Democratic president, FDR.
All right. Mr. Bengs, same question to you.
I'm going to go with Eisenhower. Eisenhower for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm torn between the Roosevelts, Teddy Roosevelt and FDR. I'm going to go with TR for a personal reason that I'll debut here. Just because, he's so connected to this area of South Dakota and what he stands for with.
But isn't North Dakota wanting his library? They're fighting. It's a battle between the Dakotas. Who gets TR, right?
But on a fun fact, I learned last year that TR is a distant cousin on my mother's side. So that's just a cool thing to
So you're
have.
Related to TR, but not FDR?
Yeah, I'm related to Eleanor.
Different
Eleanor
branch.
Roosevelt.
The Eleanor side, right? Eleanor was closer to TR than
exactly. So that's what the genealogy things that you're in go like. Hey, you might be related to these individuals, and they said you might be related to FDR, and then I looked and I was like, no, it's Eleanor Roosevelt. Then it occurred to me, well, if I'm related to Eleanor Roosevelt, am I related to TR? So yeah, that's the win.
Well, you guys should also know this. Later this week is the anniversary of a farewell address by our truly only independent president we've ever had. And it's George Washington, who absolutely eviscerates partisan politics in his farewell address. And I will say, I'm not surprised you both picked Eisenhower. I look at Eisenhower, he's the closest thing we've ever had to an independent being elected president, especially since both parties were recruiting him. And to me, Washington and Eisenhower are sort of the North Stars for me in that sense too. And it's because when you've had to lead Americans in battle, then you see everybody as an American before you see him as a Republican or a Democrat. So anyway, well, you guys are great. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chuck. I was just going to say one comment. Again, with the four of us, with Brian, Ty, Dan, and me, I mean, we all served, right? We were all probably 18 or 19 when we took the oath.
You guys are all veterans, right? You guys have all
we're all veterans. Service.
That doesn't, to me, that somebody coming from the military being an independent makes a lot more sense to me than being a partisan.
Yeah, and I think listen, when we get on the phone together, it's great. I mean, we're completing each other's sentences in terms of why we're doing this and what we're trying to accomplish. Although we've got totally different backgrounds, right? Brian's an attorney. He taught at the Air Force Academy. I spent 20 years in the tech sector, and I teach public policy now. But it's those core values, right? That I think we're all driving towards. And I was a tank commander, right? There's 4 guys inside of a tank, and if we can't get along, we're dead, right? I mean, it's very simple.
You can't be fighting over who's right about gun ownership when you're in the middle of a battle.
Exactly. Like we all learn in the military, you got a random bunch of people all thrown together, and you got a mission to do, and you figure out how to do it. And those are the values I think we're trying to bring back to Congress.
Brian, are you a Jackrabbits fan? South Dakota State. I love Tucker Kraft. I'm a Packer fan. So Tucker Kraft, man, we just love this guy. We love this guy.
I can't really comment on that because that would not be good for me. I'll just say that I'm from Iowa originally, so I went to Iowa State in Iowa. I don't have to comment on those things.
No, you can't. I got you there. And Todd, with Boise State, man, how did the University of Idaho allow Boise State to become the power in football in that state?
This is the difference between North Idaho and Southern Idaho. But
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad Genty. We don't have Genty anymore at Boise State. He was incredible, but he looks like he's going to have a good career with the Raiders.
He is fun to watch. That is old school football. Look, Brian and Todd, I hope to talk to you guys again. I mean, look, there's not. We need to disrupt the duopoly is what got us to this place. Look, we've got a lot of problems. The duopoly is pretty much I think the tech companies are number 1 and the duopoly is number 2. But if you wanted to argue the other way, I wouldn't dissuade you. So good luck out there. I'll be watching and paying attention, and hopefully more independent voices show up as well. So thank you guys. Be good.
Thank you.
Chuck. Appreciate it.